All right, the original six steps Oxford Group influences, the Frank Amos report, and the evidence from the first edition Big Book. And let's start with a little introduction. The presentation is a comprehensive view of the spiritual program that gave rise to Alcoholics Anonymous. It combines Bill W.'s recollection of the original six steps, 1953. The Oxford Group influences that shaped those practices. The 1938 Frank Amos report from Akron, which provided the earliest written description of the fellowship's methods, and testimonies from the first edition Alcoholics Anonymous, 1939. Together, these sources confirm that AA had a functioning program of recovery well before the 12 steps were published. This is the document that now is at Stepping Stones. In April 1953, Bill W. outlined what he called the original six steps. These captured the essentials of the Akron and New York program that predated the codification of the 12 steps, and they were admitted hopelessness, admitted hopeless, got honest with self, got honest with another, made amends, helped others without demand, and prayed to God as you understand him. And here's some sourced material from Bill. Now, I think it's important to note that many of the recordings that we have in the Recovery Speakers Archive, I've gone back to the earliest ones that we have, and the earliest recordings that we have of Bill W. are from 1947. Now, I don't know if there are other recordings that are earlier than this. However, I suspect if there are, we're going to find the same type of communication that Bill gives here. And here's Bill talking about Abby coming to him.
How some friends had come to him and offered him a very simple formula for getting himself straightened out. Well, I said, what is it? Show. He said, well, they told me that very obviously I couldn't straighten myself out. I'd got way beyond that. And I admitted that. And they told me that I had better get thoroughly honest with myself, make a kind of a moral inventory. Stock taking. Like a grocer would look over the apple barrel and throw out the rotten. And he thought that better look at my twisted relationships. Who did I fear? Of whom was I jealous? Who had I hurt? And go to those people without confessing their sins and confess my own. And then he described a kind of giving that demanded no return, helping other people for the love of this thing. And then in a very gingerly way, he touched on the subject of God and of prayer, and I began to wince, and he laid off.
That was early in the talk from Memphis, 1947. And this clip here is a little later in the talk.
Oh, no. He put me in the way of asking him again, just how was it, Ebby, you got this relief? Well, I just got honest with myself, and I mean honest, and I talked it out fairly with somebody else, and I went around and made restitution or promised it, and I'm trying my small way to help folks without any angles. Yes, and I pray. I've come to believe in God.
It certainly seems from these early recordings of 47 that Bill had already defined or outlined or brought into his consciousness and his memory what they were doing and what he was doing prior to the Big Book coming out.
Oh.
Now, here's a talk that Bill gave in Washington, D.C. in 1948. He describes it a little bit differently.
I am drunk in Brooklyn at home. Someone came to me, even as someone came to each of you, and he was a friend. And he said, if you will become more honest with yourself, if you will stop this accursed business of living alone and humble yourself to confess to another, if you will go out and clear away the debris of the past and straighten up these twisted relationships, if you will pray to any God that you know, or even experimentally to a God who may be there, and then if you will give of yourself to others without demand for a reward, then I think you may know relief from this deadly obsession. And that was a fundamental message. And one alcoholic was transmitted to another. My friend to me.
Then in a talk in Dallas in 1951, here's how he elaborated.
When suddenly one morning, a day I was feeling mighty low, in the door there stood my friend. Well, I hadn't seen him for years. I knew he was hard up. And there he was, way uptown New York, early in the morning, seeing me. I thought, as you have since thought, this man practices what he preaches. Then I got a little scared he'd evangelize me, turn on that sweetness and light button. Oh, no, he's cagey, just like we've learned to be. Said, just came up to pay you a visit, Bill. Heard you were up here. Hope I can be of a little help. But still, he didn't tell me what that formula was again, that prescription for recovery from alcoholism. He waited. He made me ask him. What is it, Ebby? How do you do this again? Oh, well, it's simple, said he. You get honest with yourself. You talk it out with another in confidence. Make a confession, holding back nothing. You look around at the damage you've done other people and go and make restitution. You try to be helpful to other folks without any demand for reward. And you pray to whatever God there is, and that's all there is to it, period. And he said, if you can really come to the decision to try that, even though you got no faith, I think maybe it'll help you. It did me. So he talks about the weather and a few friends, and off he's gone again. Sounds very familiar. It's happened a lot of times since, hasn't it? One alcoholic talking to another. One alcoholic reaching us at depths that no other human being has ever been able to plumb. So there it was.
That, again, Bill, it was every recording seemingly that we could find had something to do with his recollection of these principles, of these, you know, AA never had a written 6-step program. But from all of the evidence that we're finding here and all of the talks that Bill had made, it certainly sounds like these principles that he outlined in 1953 were in fact the things they were using to stay sober. Here he is talking in Atlanta in 1951.
Oh, he said, I don't know if you'd really call it religion. It's just plenty of horse sense. Group of people sold me on a lot of very simple ideas. None of them are new. Just why they've had such a terrific effect on me, I don't know, except one of the group himself was a drunk. And here are the ideas. I began to get honest with myself as I had never got honest before. I quit this hellish business of living alone. confided my defects to another. I made a list of the people I had harmed, and I visited them to set matters right so far as I could. I then was told of a kind of giving new to me, the kind of giving that demands no return in terms of economic reward or prestige or anything, the kind of giving that demands no return. I was told that if I tried to give of myself of others in such a mood, that I might lose my life to find it. Now, he said, don't leap, Bill. He said, I know your religious outlook, which is zero. But he said, in order to make these principles work, so far as my drinking was concerned, I found that I had to pray to whatever God there was.
And in 1954, at Bill's 20th anniversary, he took a couple of minutes and reviewed the following.
And what were these basics? Well, there was the idea of a personal inventory of one's defects. There was the idea of confessing these in confidence to another person. There was the idea of making restitution for harms done. There was the idea of carrying that message to other people. There was the idea of dependence upon and guidance upon God as you understood it. Those were the essential ideas that he transmitted to me over the kitchen table. Well, I said, Evie, this sounds perfectly sensible, all except the God business. After all, these aren't any very new ideas either. You might have got these most any place. Well, he said, but the point is, I got them, and this is where I got them. All of that bunch of Oxford Group people. And what were these basics?
And here in the Grapevine, in July of 1953, during the next 3 years after Dr. Bob's recovery, our growing groups of Akron, New York, and Cleveland evolved the so-called word-of-mouth program of our pioneering time. As we commenced to form society separate from the Oxford Group, we began to state our principles, something like this. We admitted we're powerless over alcohol. We got honest with ourselves. We got honest with another person in confidence. We made amends for harms done. We worked with other alcoholics without demand for prestige or money. We prayed to God to help us to do these things the best we could. Though these principles were advocated according to the whim or liking of each of us, and though in Akron and Cleveland, they still stuck by the Oxford Group absolutes of honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love, this was the gist of our message to the incoming alcoholics up to 1939, when our present 12 steps were put to paper. Since Evie's visit to me in the fall of 1934, we had gradually evolved what we called a word-of-mouth program. Most of the basic ideas had come from the Oxford Group, William James and Dr. Silkworth, though subject to considerable variation. It all boiled down into a pretty consistent procedure which comprised 6 steps. These were approximately as follows, and this is from AA Comes of Age, 1957. We admitted we were licked. We made moral inventory. We confessed or shared our shortcomings. We paid restitution to those harmed. We tried to carry and help other alcoholics with no thought of reward. And we prayed to whatever God we thought there was for power to practice these precepts. This was the substance of what, by the fall of 1938, we were telling newcomers. Several of the Oxford group's other ideas and attitudes had been definitely rejected, including any which would involve us in theological controversy. So they were beginning to refine what they were picking up in the Oxford group and having it for specifically alcoholics. 1962, How the 12 Steps Were Born, the exact quote, it all boiled down into a pretty consistent procedure which comprised 6 steps. Paraphrase of surrounding text. Bill then lists the 6 points: admitted we're licked, made moral inventory, confessed shortcomings, made restitution, helped alcoholics with no thought of reward, prayed to whatever God we thought there was for the power to carry out these precepts. Now, the Oxford Group Foundations and Influences, I think that we have to, if we look at Bill's constant conversations, his speeches, his writings, everything that he put together when he was trying to describe what the early days were like from 1934 when he got sober till 1939 when the book came out, he's relying very heavily on the influence of the Oxford group. The 6 steps Bill W. recalled were deeply rooted in the Oxford group disciplines that shaped both Bill and Dr. Bob during the 1930s. These principles were drawn from widely read Oxford group books and pamphlets published in the 1920s and early 30s, either directly read by Wilson or absorbed through conversations and practices that he had learned at the Oxford group meetings. Bill on Sam Shoemaker's influence. Sam was a leader of the Oxford group in the United States. The early AAs got its ideas of self-examination, acknowledgement of character defects, restitution for harm done, and working with others straight from the Oxford groups and directly from Sam Shoemaker, their former leader in America, and from nowhere else. And this was AA Comes of Age, 1957. Of course, we mentioned the 4 absolutes. These were benchmarks used by early AA members. And if you listen to Dr. Bob's last major talk from Detroit in 1948, he talks about utilizing these and practicing these 4 tenets of the Oxford group, or these absolutes, and measuring our behavior and conduct on these things. Frank Bookman in 1919 put together what he considered to be the 5 C's, and that's what they were known as throughout the Oxford group, and they were confidence, confession, conviction, conversion, continuance. Now, these deeply influenced AA's emphasis on confession, step 4 and 5, surrender, step 3, and eventually carrying the message in step 12. The 4 practical steps, late 20s, early 30s. Again, we're talking Oxford group here. Surrender, sharing, restitution, continuance. Surrender, giving one's life, past, present, and future. Sharing, disclosing the sins and temptations. Sounds exactly like what Bill W. had been referring to his entire life. Making amends to those that we had wronged, and continuous seeking and following divine guidance in all things. Conversion experience and intellectual influences. The Oxford group emphasized the necessity of spiritual conversion and surrender experience. This theme was reinforced by broader literature. William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience, 1902. analyze the psychology of spiritual awakenings, distinguishing once born from twice born individuals. James' work, cited in the Big Book, page 38 and 39 in the first edition, gave credibility to the idea of sudden transformation. And certainly we know that's what Bill experienced in Towns Hospital when he cried out, "Is there a God? Show himself." And Bill talked about that experience. Similarly, Harold Bigby's Twice Born Men, 1909, presents stories of men transformed by religious conversions. These narratives resonated with what early AA members were experiencing and helped frame the expectation of life-changing surrender. Testimonies. Testimonies were the beating heart of the Oxford group, known as Witness. These personal accounts demonstrated a transforming power of absolute surrender, confession, restitution, and daily guidance. The group believed that one changed life could spark another. And so stories were told and retold and printed. In respect, Alcoholics Anonymous later borrowed directly from the Oxford Group model. The Big Book's back section, filled with personal stories, mirrors the Oxford Group tradition of letting lived experience speak louder than theory. In a 1932 book, For Sinners Only by A.J. Russell, I was certainly getting the hang of what the Oxford Group were after. First, there was an absolute surrender, bringing guidance by the Holy Spirit. Then there was sharing, bringing true fellowship and shining faces. Then life-changing, bringing in God's kingdom and joy in heaven, in the sinner, and in the life changer. Then faith and prayer, bringing all things needful and helpful forward God's plan to provide for everyone. Also, those four standards of love, honesty, purity, and unselfishness on which Christ had never compromised. And of course, restitution. That's page 30. For Sinners Only. Again, the original 6 steps. Let's look at where these original steps can be found in practice and in writing before the Big Book. Admit hopelessness, admit powerlessness, acknowledge complete defeat, hit bottom, surrender to win, concede unmanageability. Religion That Works by Sam Shoemaker, 1928, The Meaning of Self-Surrender. The process which comes before the act of surrender is the long discovery that the way of self is no way at all. Boy, some serious ego deflation there. I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. I was licked. I was utterly powerless to deal with myself. When I faced that fact, I was nearer to God than I had ever been before. About Charles Clapp in the book, The Big Bender. There, a former drunk who had completely given up drinking after coming in touch with the group cornered me. We spent several hours together, and I honestly faced not only the problem of liquor itself, but all things underneath and back of it all, which had caused me to drink. For the first time, I admitted drinking had me licked. When I drank, I lost control of myself, and I was the most selfish human being on earth. That's page 152. Now, the second principle or the second outline step, I do have difficulty calling these steps because they really weren't formalized that way, but certainly for the context of this conversation, we're going to continue. More twice-born men. There is no fact so great in the experience of men, he said quietly, as the fact that the soul on extreme edge of destruction can be redeemed to life merely by turning around. Sincerely, right around. The most beautiful of all parables certainly teaches that the Father can do nothing until the Son has turned his face homeward. The book, What is the Oxford Group? To thine own self be true, said Shakespeare, and it must follow. As night the day, thou canst not be false to any man. To ourselves, the absolute truth. To others, as truthful as we are to ourselves. Can we do it? Can we sit down even for a few moments and face the self the world does not see and tell that self the absolute truth? Then, having told that hidden self the absolute truth, can we be honest and let that truth become a conscious part of ourselves? How many of us can do that? Page 75, what is the Oxford Group? More twice-born men. PG, at any rate, is insistent on the power of confession to fill the spirit with an entirely new sense of life. He lays all his emphasis there. To him, the matter is not in the least mysterious. Confession is merely a sign of an absolute honesty within, a sign that the long attempt to compromise and equivocate is over, a sign that the personality is at last unified, not divided, a sign that the soul really means what it says and truly believes what it has hitherto only professed or tried to believe. That is from Harold Bigby, 1921. Twice-born men. Now, to get honest with self, the number 3, admitting my wrongs, sharing my 5th step with a sponsor, made a full confession to someone I trust, told the whole truth. Again, what is the Oxford Group? Sharing of sins and practicing by the Oxford Group is sharing in an ordinary sense of the word. In plain language, it is telling or talking over our sins with another whose life has already been surrendered to God. Or if we have already surrendered, assisting another to surrender by openly, as we are guided, laying our past sins or present temptations alongside theirs, so they may be able to better recognize and bring to light those sins which have stood between them and God. This really sounds like taking someone through the 5th step here. When Man Listens, 1936 by Cecil Rose. Sharing can be defined as being honest with other people about yourself. It means being willing for God's purposes to give the whole of yourself to anyone. It does not mean telling everything about yourself to everybody you meet. It does mean being willing to tell anything to anyone if God shows you that your sharing can be useful in establishing a new and deeper relationship or in helping another person to find God. Almost sounds like the exact nature of our wrongs. I was a pagan, 1934. I found myself blurting out the whole story. I was never going to tell anybody when we told each other fully and freely the kind of people that we really were. There began that change in me, which accumulated in the change of my entire life. The Big Bender, 1937. One of my first steps was to talk over my life completely with someone, and this necessitated my going back to Sam Shoemaker, admitting I had not been absolute honest when I first talked with him. This was hard to do. It made me feel like I was perfect stinker to have seen him rather frequently over 2 years, yet not to have been completely on the level with him. There were people I had to see and to whom I had to make restitution. Clearly, they were taking action and beginning to make amends. And here, the fourth, direct amends, righted thought, repair the harm caused, clean up my side of the street, mend fences. From what is the Oxford Group? Restitution is righting to the best of our present ability wrongs we have committed in the past. The reception given to our acts of restitution by those to whom we make them are in themselves an interesting sidelight on human character. The absolute honesty of restitution is usually a new wonder to those who have been until then unaware of what a surrendered life can mean in a world where dishonesty is often taken for granted and truth has lost much of its meaning. Page 56 of What is the Oxford Group? Here, 1934, again, I was a pagan. There was no peace until I had gone back and told the truth with those I had deceived. Humiliating as it was the only way out. That's V.C. Kitchen. Step 5, helping others without demand, practicing selfless service. Give it away to keep it. Carry the message with no strings attached. Help without expecting anything in return. Showed up for the next sufferer with no agenda. Here from Cecil Rose, When Man Listens, the first condition is our own simple honesty. If we try to hand on the other people something we have not got ourselves, it will be no wonder if they are unimpressed. People are drawn and captured by something they can see has really happened to us. It is not that we are consciously dishonest, but we present to others the belief and the experience we feel we ought to have rather than those we actually have. Back to more twice-born men, what strikes me most in all of these wonderful experiences, or it is wonderful thing to see a man born again, is their extreme simplicity. Directly, a man is really honest, the miracle occurs. Many deceive themselves. They protest that they want to be rid of sin, and it isn't really true. Others do want to be rid of their sin, but selfishly for their own ease, their own self-respect, or because they are afraid of being found out. Those find it difficult. But when a man hungers and thirsts to be rid of sin so that he may help others, it really is extraordinary how soon the step is taken from darkness to light, from sleep to waking. It seems natural and right when one considers that the message of Jesus was unselfishness. There can't be vital experience of religion where selfishness has got a hold, whatever form it takes. And that's page 100. And then prayed to God as we understood him. We understand him. Prayed to a higher power for understanding. Sought conscious contact through prayer and meditation. Talked to my higher power in my own words, asked God as I understand him for guidance, prayed in my own way, not anyone else's. Here, Jack Winslow, When I Awake, 1938. My experience over these years has taught me that this quiet hour spent with God day by day is an unfailing secret of power, progress, purpose, and peace. Page 13. My usual practice is as follows. Having renewed my surrender to God and told him that I'm ready for whatever he desires, and having with myself offered to him in intercession those for whom I wish specifically to pray, I then lift up before him the day that lies ahead and ask him to show me his plan for it. V.C. Kitchen, I made my surrender absolute and unconditional. I asked his help rather attempt the thing myself, rather than attempt the thing myself, and something unusual happened. I felt a strange sense of dependency on some power that was utterly dependable. And from the Big Bender, I definitively determined to turn over my life to God, to try and straighten out all the messes I had caused and pay whatever price was necessary to get my life as nearly as I could on a basis of absolute honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. Since that day in October 35, I've not had a drink. Bill Wilson steps again, admitted we were powerless, made a moral inventory, confessed our shortcomings, made restitution, tried to help other alcoholics, prayed to God for strength to carry it out. Join us on October 7th for part 2 and see how the original AA members before the Big Book were staying sober.